Hello and welcome to Built on Air, a podcast and video series about all things Airtable. I'm your host, Zoe Vanderplu, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, OpenSide. Visit openside.com for products and services that will take your Airtable to the next level. Use promo code BuiltOnAir, one word, all caps, for a one-time $20 credit off of any purchase. Today I have the pleasure of chatting with Alex Bass from Buffalo, New York. Alex is founder and owner of CyberBytes and host of Analysis Paralysis, a podcast focused on business process design. In this episode of Built on Air, and on his own podcast as well, Alex discusses what it's like to be a business owner in this rapidly evolving, semi-enigmatic niche of workflow design. Alex has pivoted a lot throughout his journey in the tech world, and he does a great job of explaining his steps and thought process along the way. Alex's company CyberBytes specializes in working with Copper CRM for G Suite. They often augment Copper's functionality by building automations and integrating other software, which is where Airtable comes in. Alex describes how he often uses Airtable as a staging area to store and manipulate raw data as it flows from one app to the next. In his screen share demo, we take a look at a simplified example of an Airtable base he created for a client, which seamlessly cleans and formats responses from a website contact form before pushing them into Copper. Check out BuiltOnAir.com to sign up for our mailing list, where you can get weekly updates on new Built on Air episodes and other fun Airtable things.
Everything that's kind of going on here. So just envision a website form that would, upon putting information in it, simply put all of the data into here. So you'd start off the invoice number. The way that we actually calculated this is the unique opportunity ID that was created within the system, so Copper. So the process that happened was initially upon the form submission, we would then go to Copper and generate an opportunity, and then we would take that unique opportunity ID and then paste it here. So now we have this very cool standardization across all the platforms, because the invoice number that they're using internally is now the unique Copper opportunity ID. So at any point in time in the future, if we need to do some type of automation, as long as we know the invoice number, we can literally just do an API request to that specific record and modify it. So before they were using like number 1 invoice, 2, 3, 4, and it's just counting up. And it's like we can actually make it be something that's a little bit more structured and give more purpose in the future.
Right.
So then we'll post all this information, nothing crazy. There's little areas where we'll take like first name, last name, and then we'll create like a function of the first and last name, just so that doesn't need to be kind of broken out a little bit weird. I know sometimes forms will have a first name field, a last name field, and other times we'll have a conjoined field. This is just a nice way to kind of structure the data in a way that you want them to be structured. So just run through and just puts all the basic information. Here's the important area though. So like as you add the model, so for example, let's take the car model and say that they added the car model of Impreza like I was giving. What it's actually doing is you can look at the car model up here, which is a very simple list of saying, Impreza, and that's equal to the Copper ID of that. And then this is where it's kind of tied to. So now after all of this information is pushed in, we can actually view the Copper ID field. And now all of these fields that had these names are now random values. And then this could very simply just be pushed over to Copper directly, and everything kind of gets filled in. So we took it a step further too, where they would also sometimes submit photos. They actually had to submit photos of what their house looked like, their garage, and things like that. So we created like a photos upload that pulled the specific form submission request. And then we have like a field here, for their house. Obviously, that's not someone's house that they're doing work for. Gorgeous. A garage. This is almost like a mock garage. But essentially, then we have all of these files within here as well. So it's this very nice way where you can actually be within a form submission. You could jump to the photo upload and see all the photos. And we just want to keep them a little bit separate, because this was kind of less important for them to see all the images. But at the end of the day, all this stuff is then being pushed over to Google Drive and stored. So the trigger of creating a new, I guess, like row here would actually trigger the creation of a Google Drive folder for a specific customer. And then it would take all the image attachments and move them there. So really what they're doing is they're just using Google Drive and they're using Copper to do their day-to-day. this is just running in the background to kind of be this intermediary database that stores data that they could jump into and analyze it and take a look at it, and manipulate it. But really, it's just kind of on the background, and they shouldn't need to really touch it much. The territory owner lookup that was kind of fun that we were dealing with is, okay, so what happens? We actually did a lookup within Airtable, and you can do it through a range. So we made the minimum range is the postal code here, and then maximum is here. So essentially, if someone put in the postal code 521436, then it would grab here. It would say, oh, the territory is Buffalo because it's within this range. It will now make the territory owner as Alex, and then all the information kind of going to the side here. So now we have like a unique phone number and all this information tied to the territory owner that we then use later for like sending out an email. So after someone fills out the form, all the stuff starts triggering and going off. And then at the end, they get an email from their territory owner. And that's all automated because we could simply say, well, your territory owner is Alex, and we'll send an email from their email account now because we know all this information. So that's kind of the main area. And then here's where you can just kind of keep record of all this information and then what territories they run. So you could just very simply jump through and say, oh no, now he's managing Boston, and he is going to be managing, Buffalo. So you could very easily, for the customer, the client, to be able to go in and change what territory owners are managing what territories. And the beautiful thing is that doesn't stop any of the automation. Like it just keeps running and working. So that's the bulk of this specific example. And I think this is a really good use case for the way that we use Airtable a lot. And that's really using as this intermediary database to take all this structured data and format it in a way that it needs to be. So it's one type of data comes in, different type of data comes out. So.
Right. And just even in those 4 tables, it's like, think of the amount of human wasted time that saves, whereas before it's like someone would get the form submission, but then they would have to manually input it into Copper and then manually upload, these files. It's like now it just all, happens so easily. And I'm really glad the U.S. Postal Service gives us, numerically organized zip codes.
Yes. So some of that was a little bit messy. It's interesting. I think as they scale more, it might not be the perfect solution, but for the most part, it seemed to be fairly decent. I don't know what we would do otherwise. What they're actually doing was they were using Google Sheets, and they had a list of about 7,000 rows, and they were just individual zip codes. And then to the right, it would say what territory. So it would say 50001, 50002. Each one would say Buffalo, 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 Buffalo. And it's like, we were thinking through it, and having it look up through 7,000 records to try and match it is going to take a while, especially if you're doing that for a bunch of requests all at once. Whereas here's a solution that we're using one row to solve the exact same thing that, thousands of rows were doing beforehand. Really? So, Airtable is very, very, it made that much more efficient. So it was taking about 2 minutes or so to run initially, each time a new form request came in, and we restructured it. We made it run better. And it took about 20 seconds or so after we made all the changes and made Airtable at the core of it. So it really made it a lot more efficient.
That's awesome. Really cool. So, and then, so I know we'll kind of just focus on these, 4 tables here, but when you were building like just like the zip code lookup, was there any like other sort of weird problems that, are brain puzzlers that, you came up with maybe like your third solution was the best, right?
Yeah. So this is where I love like the edge cases come into play. So there's the idea we can solve this problem. I feel good about it, but then there's always those edge cases that throw a wrench into things. So something that kept happening that we had to fix was, what happens if someone uses the full postal code, which actually has that dash? So there are 2 ways they can go about doing it. On the website form, you can either restrict it and saying like, you can't have a special character like dash, but the client not being super technical in the web development aspect, we're like, we need to manage this kind of on our end. And so what we had to do was, upon the information coming in, we also had to run some custom code to just say, ignore everything after a dash. Like if a dash exists, erase the dash and everything after it, because we only need the first, 5 characters. And then another thing too is, what happens if someone submits a postal code that is not within any of the postal code ranges. So that would really just mean that they don't service that area. But what we had it do was we had it create a new row, and then we had it at the end of the automation, it would send like a different type of email, but it would create it as like a draft. It wouldn't send it out yet because this would allow the company to handle it how they wanted to handle it. Maybe they wanted to say, I'm sorry, we don't service this area. I could recommend you to this person. Or maybe they'll say, we're actually going to move to that area in a couple of weeks. And so it gave the control back to the client. So it stopped the automation from happening because it's like, well, we don't know what to do with this because this isn't actually within the keys that we have set. So those were two big things that came into play specifically with the postal code kind of lookup area.
Yeah, and that is a good point. It's like, there is sort of so much emphasis on, using Zapier to automate everything. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you do want that human touch or that kind of opportunity for human judgment. So yeah, that's a really cool way that you kind of just built that in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, to that point, actually, I think it's an interesting thing that I brought up recently. I was getting a lot of like sales requests into my site, and I would always go through and have to create the template and like send out this message to someone, whether typically they weren't a good fit because they were reaching out and they didn't use Copper or some type of thing. And I realized that I just kept typing the same thing up over and over and over and over. And then I created a template for it. But then on mobile, it was still a pain to select the template and dealing with all this stuff. So what I did was I created an automation that just created a draft email. So every single new like sales request that comes in, I already have a pre-built email in draft form that I got to click send to. And this kind of the sad part is it's actually a decline email because more often we're getting stuff that isn't a good fit right. Versus that. But it's like, hey, typically we work with companies that are doing 1.5 million a year in revenue or more. Just kind of set some expectations in that email. And that's one of the things that are super important, that it's like, you don't always want to have it. So a form request comes in and you automatically respond to them. Automation is great for that, but it's like someone can tell that the email is not built for them. So I have like this little area that's like add context around what the actual request is about, like replace this with that. Right. And it's very, custom to the actual needs. So you can leverage automation while also making it personal at the same time. Yeah, cool. That's really clever. And I did have one other thing I was going to ask you about this, but I totally forgot. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. Maybe it'll pop back into my head. But yeah, I really love this kind of just really kind of clever, custom lookup table essentially you built. Oh, and this is what I was going to say. The other thing that I love about this is that all of the form submissions go in here. So like you said, you can also run analysis easily through Airtable if you want, if it is some kind of thing that's not easy to get through Copper or another app that they're using. Oh, there's additional benefits too. So we're using this similarly for a couple other clients too. One of the forms, it's like a 5-hour form that needs to be filled out. It's for a company that they do like a startup pitch competition like Shark Tank, but it's kind of local to the Buffalo area. And they have thousands of applicants spending about 5 hours filling out a form. And we regularly have the data send to Airtable to kind of sit. And something that we notice, sometimes APIs go down, right? Like the data is trying to send from Airtable to Copper and Copper's API goes down or some type of thing goes down. We now have this intermediary database that we can check against the website form versus Airtable versus Copper. So it's just like one more place to check when information gets messed up. And it's this beautiful thing that you could run in there and be like, well, why is it different? Why is Copper different from what the website says? And we can actually see Airtable and realize like, oh, this field was just changed because it keeps the history of each field that's been changed. And that's saved us so many times, being able to have that historical record through Airtable. So I honestly recommend having Airtable as this intermediary database, even just for very simple form requests sending from sites. Right. Yeah. It's a great kind of staging area. Yeah. And I guess it's like sort of also showing your kind of like IT background. This is like the cloud-based version, right? Of like server redundancy. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Cool. I love that. Well, thank you so much for kind of showing us this and walking through it. I feel like managing inquiries from web forms is like one of the like most important parts of some businesses and also like the bane of their existence. Yeah, most definitely. It's cool to see this solution. And where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or look at more of your work? Yeah, so you can shoot me an email directly at abass@aparalysis.com, or I'm on Twitter and Instagram, all that fun stuff at Alex H Bass. I just don't use social media too often. The best way to get to me is probably just direct email. You can just search for my company, CyberBytes Inc. Feel free to shoot a message. I love to talk about this stuff, so feel free to connect from the relationship aspect, or if you actually have a business need, I'm more than happy to talk through some things as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alex. It was great learning a little bit more about your journey and CyberBytes and Analysis Paralysis. Great podcast name, by the way. I agree with your friend.
You guys too. Like, it's the perfect fit for. Oh, when he brought that up to me, I was like, that is the perfect fit.
I know, isn't that? It's such a great name.
Yeah.
It really, there is like a lot in a name.
There is, yeah.
Especially for podcasts, I think, because a lot of it's just like the so-and-so show or something. And I'm like, I don't know what this is about. So I'm gonna maybe not listen.
It's definitely, and it's interesting that I was listening to a podcast episode where they're talking about how it's tough to be found. The discovery is a big difficulty. That if you can, instead of saying like Johnny Jim's real estate advice, like if you focus like Buffalo real estate, like if you're, Buffalo real estate podcast, so someone can actually search for that. The downside is now it's too focused.
Right.
So it's that beautiful balance between the two. But it's tough to find content.
Right. But especially now it's like what is the crazy stat on podcasts? There's like millions of them, right? Or something crazy like that. And then, but it is, now there's so much content out there that you really can get super specific and still reach, a community that's really interested in what you do. And Airtable, right? I kind of thought of it when I started as like a very sort of niche thing, but especially after doing this podcast, and just realizing how many people just use it for everything, and like how it has this weird, like, people just are really attracted to it in this weird way. And I always thought, I was like, oh, like I like apps, I'm kind of nerdy. But it actually, there is something definitely about it that's like a legitimate pull. So yeah, just connecting with like really niche communities is like a really, cool thing that is just starting to be possible now. Again, like we were talking about kind of in this space. So
I would implore anyone listening who currently uses Excel or Google Sheets. There's some people that are insane at it, right? They're very, very good with it. But go check out Airtable and actually play around with it. I know it's going to be a little bit different and weird at first, but the things that you can do you're really building a web app, even though like just from having your knowledge of Google Sheets and everything. So it's so powerful.
It really is. Yeah. Well, and we'll link in your show notes to Analysis Paralysis so everyone can check out your discussions and investigations, semi-related, I guess, to our world. And thank you so much for being on the show, Alex. I had a great time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much. I appreciate the invite. So look, definitely we'll keep in touch.
For sure.